Hello, this is Blair Stanislao with the Happy Lion Center. Welcome to our podcast, Mystical and Infamous, where we have playful and easy conversations about anything mystical, getting to the heart of all things strange and weird. Join us in a bit of magical tomfoolery, spreading the alchemy of love and light. And now, we invite you to enjoy the show. So we were talking earlier, and you were talking about how as soon as you were honestly old enough to see, you were able to see energy. And I'm really curious to hear about that because I've had an interesting transition learning to talk about energy. And I kind of wonder what you have to say because I'm interested how it compares to my thought process. And I'm sure all the listeners are too.
So, yeah, well, at the time, I didn't even realize that what I was seeing is energy and things moving through it. And, I could see it. I could see the waves and I could see the particles that are flowing through the waves. But I just thought that was normal, that everybody did that, right? And then, as you get older and people are like, do you see that? And I'm like, yeah, I see it. And then I start describing it in the way that I see it. You get those looks where people are like, so then that's when I really started realizing that I don't see the world in the ways that other people do. And one of the beautiful things even about energy is that there's a lot of colors in it. So, or at least that's the way I see it. So I see very vibrantly is the best way that I can describe it. So what a red would look like to somebody else, it's very vibrant and beautiful. I love colors. So, as I started getting older, it doesn't go away. So I could see it. But it was interesting because I remember being in like science class and, when we talk about like solids, liquids, gases, it was like I already knew what they were talking about and how the particles, like, when we're talking about things that are solid, like, when I look at like a bed, I see a bed. But I can also, when I really go to focus on it, I can see the particles or the atoms like this. And, and they're still moving. It's not that like they just stop and that creates a solid, right? They're still moving and shifting because everything with energy is vibration. So there's still a vibration. But it was interesting because I could see it going like this.
Wiggling.
And I was like, yeah. And I was like, well, when the motion is slow and the atoms and the particles come together, thus creates a solid, right?
Yeah.
So, and it's kind of the same way with like liquids, because liquid is a bit thicker, but now we're moving faster. And then, with gas, it's, like the vibration of gas itself is like very high vibrational because you can't actually, you can't actually see it most of the time, right? Mm-hmm. So even like a good example of that is like I live in Arizona. So when you go to pump your gas, right, you can see the energy coming up from it so that you can see it's a gas and it's never flowing smooth. It's always moving very quickly with its vibrations. Anyway, so that was always how I saw the world. I'm sorry.
Is that the same as seeing the fumes, would you say? Or do you see the fumes and also...
I can see the fumes and also like the vibrations that are within it. So anyway, so I grew up like that thinking like, that's normal, until I started getting those weird looks and people started questioning what it was that I was seeing. But even now, like I still see it. Like I sit in my house and I can see the energy moving. And I know when I have a disincarnate visitor by the way the energy distorts and the way the energy moves. I know when, because I connect with all sorts of beings. So I know when there's an angel, I know when there's a galactic that's coming through, like I can just see it. And so most of the time it's a lot of disincarnates. Believe it or not, we do walk around with a lot of disincarnates because our world and their world does combine. So I call them passerbys. So when I'm sitting there and I'm watching the distortion in the energy, I'm like, oh, I have a passerby. And then I kind of watch where the energy goes and they come in one side and usually exit another side or they hang out longer. But I've just always seen that. So, in the work that I do, and, I mentioned earlier that I've always worked in like trauma and mental health. I started really wanting more information on how energy works with trauma and mental health. So not only do we have the magnetic energy flowing through our brains and our system, but we also have to think of things from a psychological level, right? Emotions.
Mhm.
Like, what is the energy behind emotions? So I really started putting those two things together, which then led me to down my journey of doing hypnosis, because I knew that there was something within the separation of the conscious mind and the subconscious mind. Believe it or not, it's different different vibrational energy when we're in our conscious mind versus our subconscious mind.
Can you see that is my question.
Yes, I can.
Okay, so I do have a question about that. I want to stop.
Yeah.
So I have been working a lot myself personally, even in the last 2 months, on really starting to recognize other people call them trapped emotions, but whatever you want to call it, it's a response to a past experience, whether it's mine now or mine from another time or somebody else's that came and influenced me or whatever. And it has been a very hard grasp for me to understand, because they've said things like, well, just the other day, there was one that there was a trigger between my husband and I. And then I had this conversation about what that trigger was and what do you do with it? And this turned into, you're afraid of death. Okay. And
Oh,
I
okay.
can get that, but I'm a widow of 11 years, and you make a lot of transitions in that time. You're grieving, you're getting over whatever it is you have to get over. You're kind of processing how you think things work and so forth. And I would say consciously, at least, I feel like I've gotten to the point where I don't really feel like I have a fear of death. But then I go and have a dream analysis. So we know this doesn't have anything to do, and this was by Michael Sheridan, but this doesn't have anything to do with anybody else. Okay. And he does this dream analysis he's been doing for more than 30 years. And I have studied enough to know that he's dead on about this. But the stuff that he pulled out was just like, I was like, you have issues you need to work on with your mom, meaning your personal relationship, right? My mom is gone, my dad is gone. It's not about that. It's about my relationship, I guess, with me per se, about that.
Gotcha.
But to have that pulled out, it's just the weirdest thing. It's a very strange experience. So what do you say to somebody who is having a hard time, like me, connecting? I'm to the point where I cannot say that it's not there. I know it's there. Understanding it or seeing it or feel it, whatever I need to do. It's strange to go into that subconscious part. How do you do that? I mean, I do hypnosis too, so I kind of get it, but not fully.
So, you know what? That's an interesting. I've never had anybody actually ask me that. So, I guess from the point of view of where I see it, right? Because I can see the energy of the conscious mind, I can see the energy of the subconscious mind, and like you said, you do hypnosis. You can tell when like by the way people are answering that their conscious mind is stepping forward. But I actually see the energies almost like start taking over the energy within like the thoughts, or like the patterning is the best way I could describe it. Or like even like I said, even emotions have different vibrational patterns. So I've been living with this all my life. So when I'm watching, when I'm watching this, I'm like, I don't like to use the word trapped emotions. But they do get stuck. So we're probably going to go like this and come back, because they do get stuck in our bodies, right? But usually, and I'm actually in the process of studying about peptides and neuropeptides right now. I mean, I have an idea of it, but even in our peptides, and I won't get into all of the scientific behind it with, but like things, for example, we have, energy with our emotion, if it's a match for whatever that receptor is, it slips right into that spot as if it's like a lock and key, right? You stick the key in and it's like a perfect match. So it's interesting as people, and I forgot what your question is, but I guess saying the difference. I'm so sorry. My brain is starting to go because I'm like, woo. So, but I mean, you could call that trapped, you could call that stuck, but right. So peptides are really amino acid chains that are created into proteins. Well, proteins get stuck in our body. So imagine if you have that energy that has slipped into that receptor, that lock, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then our neuropeptides, so I guess I am getting a bit sciencey, sticks into our body, and it can stick anywhere within our body, right? So one of the things that, believe it or not, that I can see is not only can I see the energy within the neuropeptide, but I can see I'm going to say like almost like what it appears to be like the foreign energy that's stuck in that receptor.
Okay.
That is now stuck within our bodies. So a lot of times when we're talking about subconscious, right, we're thinking about parts that are in the brain, or more like in the mind is what I'm going to say, because the brain is a different entity from the mind. It's almost like when I go in there, I can see those receptors or those peptides, and then I can see where almost like a fear, because you talked about having a fear of death, where the fear like steps is then connected in there.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
It does. My next immediate question, just because of my personal history with the practices that I do, it seems like essentially, correct me if I'm wrong, you're saying that the emotion, which comes into fruition and turns into a chemical in the body.
Mm-hmm.
So, for lack of a better term, let's pretend that it's an actual chemical. So the chemical goes into the neuropeptide. Okay, so we know this is not completely accurate, but it goes into the neuropeptide. So it's the vibration of this chemical, this emotional response that connects with that peptide. And here's my next question. My experience has been that it then gets drawn to, meaning if this is, I don't want to use the word negative, but I think that's the word, at least for this language. Okay. If it's a negative emotion, it gets drawn to a specific place that's connected with that emotion. So
wait, when you mean place, are you talking about like an action? Okay.
That's what I mean. Because we have ailments that on the outside, we look and we say, oh, you've got you've got a problem with your toe. Okay. So there's a problem in my toe. Let's say that the neuropeptides went to my toe for whatever reason. Okay. Mm-hmm. The reason it goes to the toe versus going to the knee, right? Mm-hmm. It has to be an energy thing, right? Like there has to be something behind it. Does that make sense?
I think so. So like pulling in it. So it sounds like part of what you're like describing. If I remember reading, you're a QHHT practitioner,
I
right?
also do BQH, but yes. Uh-huh.
Okay. So, like in QHHT, when you're doing an interview and people are talking about like the physical ailments, right? It's all like, and QHHT is always connected to something that's emotional or something that happened, right? So even using your example of like the big toe, right? So the big toe, and so follow along with me. The big toe is, if you chop off your big toe, your balance is awful. And the reason I know that is I didn't chop off my big toe, but I played soccer and I actually broke a bone that you have that's in your big toe. For the life of me, without going through physical therapy, I could not balance. Okay. It was insane. Yeah. So for example, so if that energy is going in there, right? And bear with me, I'm going to get to my point is, so learning what we've learned in QHHT, we're like, oh, there's a balancing issue, right? What was out of balance in their life? Mm-hmm. So kind of relating it back to being able to see energy, I can actually see how it's creating that imbalance. Does that make sense? Yes. So here's the other thing too, is that it doesn't necessarily mean that we have to go back and rehash that experience of what happened, right? Because who wants to relive trauma?
Not me.
I don't. Yeah, like I don't want to, but like you can go in there, okay, and then you can actually go in there and start transmuting the particles or the atoms or whatever it is that's stuck in there and start creating it, or I could say creating, but transmuting or transforming it into something different. Because so I'm going to kind of go back to what I was saying, like when that energy goes into that receptor, it automatically changes the vibration of whatever that peptide is.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So it will change the vibration of it. So for example, okay, so let's say we'll stick with your big toe. Let's say your big toe is happy. Okay. We've got happy, glorious peptides in there. Okay. But maybe there was something that happened, in your childhood where that peptide went, like there was something that attracted it down to that big toe, right? So now we have something that triggers us. And guess what? So now we've got that energy that's floating in our body. And guess where it goes into? It's going to go into like another receptor that could possibly be connected to that peptide that's already in disharmony. So now guess what? We change the vibration again, right? And anything that has like emotions such as anger, sadness, those types of things have a lower vibration. So now it starts vibrating even lower, right? Mm-hmm. So it's like so for me, in the way that I can see energy, I can see where the vibration has changed. And I can start to see like where it's kind of like I'm trying to describe this the best I can, but like the way it's now transmuted, because you cannot destroy energy. You can only transmute energy. So now it's changed again. So then follow along with me. Okay. So then let's say there's something else that happens, completely different situation, same reaction to the trigger. Yep. So now we're going to go find something that feels alike, right? I call it wants to slip into the comfort zone, right? Because so then it slips into another receptor, and then now the vibration has changed again. So really what it's almost like creating, or like what's, in psychology, it's known as like memory chains, right? Okay. So we have the original incident, and then as we keep moving forward into the present, we have the next incident that then is connected to the original incident. And then we have another incident that's now connected to that incident and that incident to the original incident. So it's literally when those triggers happen, it does connect a lot of times to that same peptide or neuropeptide. But then what happens is now when we have a neuropeptide that is full of this very low vibrational energy, then we create, right, this ease. So then maybe, I don't know, maybe I was gonna say gangrene in your toe or something, right? Yeah. But then there's enough of that energy. And if we go back to creating like if we want to, the chemical reaction, so we're just literally putting I'm going to say like toxic chemicals in there. So a lot of times when we talk about even like the type of work that we do, the energy healing work that we do, we go in there, right? And we want to start removing. We want to start taking the key out of all of those locks, right? And because we want to take that energy out, and then we want to replace it with a high vibrational energy. So now we've got our peptide. It may not be vibrating at the same way that it was, right? But now we can work on it to vibrate it at a higher rate. So now to kind of tie that into the subconscious. So if we have a neuropeptide where the memory chains match that, a lot of times the memory chains is what's creating that pattern. Does that make sense? So we fall into this pattern, right? And now you look like you have a question.
Yeah, no, I guess I'm trying to process that. So you're saying that what did you call it? Memory chains are causing the pattern. Is that what you?
Well, it creates the pattern, right? Okay. So let's kind of go back a little bit. So we have the memory chain, or like people who go, so I don't know if you run into this, but you get those people and they're like, I don't understand why I keep going back to the same type of guy. Yeah. Okay. Well, I mean, that's just a common
of any kind. They keep running into the same problem. Right. Yeah.
The same thing. Well, if you do a memory trace back to where it originally happened, like then you'll see like and then they do it again, because what they're being drawn to is those neuropeptides that have now grabbed onto to that energy, right? Does that make sense?
It does. Okay. I want to say here. Okay. So I'm really trying to, I spend a lot of time trying to figure out how do we, it's not even assimilate. How do we understand how these two worlds exist at the same time. Okay. And by that, what I mean is we are spiritual beings in a physical body experiencing a physical experience, right?
Correct.
If you talk to a very spiritual person, they say that the spirituality is the core essence of what and who we are. And the physical stuff is not as significant. Of course, I fall into that line a little more than I fall into the other line. But if you look at it from the other perspective, somebody who's more present in the 3D, or, and as a spiritual person would say, in a way, diluted by the 3D, like this is it, that's all there is. I think they have those problems. And at least astrologically, I know in other methods where we learn about ourselves through the hidden knowledge, right? Is that you have these struggles, like you run into the same problem. You have the same physical ailment over and over because there is this energy signature, which sounds similar to this memory chain thing that you're talking about. Okay.
Yes. Okay.
Deal with the real issue behind it, which sounds like, an emotional response to something. Maybe we could use that as an example. If you don't allow that energy to flow through, like the energy to stop moving, you're allowing it to stop moving, then you wind up having these problems. So I guess what I'm trying to put together here is this reminds me, what you're describing reminds me of, it's so connected to science. That's what's just so amazing to me.
Yes.
And the quantum, I'm just thinking about the double slit experiment. I forgot when they're, they spin one way and then one of them changes and the other one changes. So it's almost, and that's the experience that I have found when people are saying things like, I listened long enough that I finally figured it out that, let's say this life of mine, I have this traumatic experience, which then triggers it over here. So, and then in this other life, maybe I didn't have an experience, but it's coming up for some reason. And it's kind of triggered. So like, it's almost like we're working on ourselves multidimensionally all the time.
Well, we are multidimensional beings, and people just like, we don't, and like, people who are very immersed in 3D, it's very hard for them to see that, but we really are multidimensional beings. We live in different dimensions all day long.
Yeah.
Like we really do, so for example, maybe I'm at work and I'm very concentrated on this email that I have to send out. I'm now in the 3D world, right? Now my work day is over and I'm driving home and I don't even remember how I get home.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? So now I've moved into like another dimensional space.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
So now let's say I'm sitting there and I'm watching TV and I zone out. We're moving through we're constantly moving through different dimensions. If that makes sense. Even like right before we go to bed or right before we wake up, we are in another dimensional timeline. But because it's not often talked about, people don't realize that, right? They just think, well, this is what I do. This is like my normal day. Oh, I zoned out while I was driving. Well, guess what was getting you home was your, like, people have different names for it. Your subconscious, super conscious, higher self, is what's getting you home.
Okay. So I just have to interject. I don't know if you saw this movie, but when I saw it, I was like, this is the coolest thing ever. It is all of these ideas that you're talking about, but it has come into fruition in a creative experience where people can watch it and start to entertain the idea. So whatever part of them is not ready for that, because it's fun, it's there. So everything, everywhere, all at once. Did you see that?
No,
you have to see it.
Okay.
It is exactly. Okay. It's like you pull on. That's essentially what the whole movie is about. They realize that they're multidimensional. Okay. And they have their whatever names that they have for it, but she learns to, like in one dimension, she's, I think she's like really good at Kung Fu or something. I don't know, good at fighting. Right. And so she needs to fight in this other dimension where she's like this meager little laundromat owner. And so when she needs to do that, she essentially, what they have them do, of course, because it's fiction, right? They have this little ear thing that they stick on and she puts it on there and they have to do something weird. And doing that kind of jolts the system. And then all the memories of how to fight or whatever she has to do from that skill set comes into her body. And then she's able to do it. Mm-hmm. And so it's, yeah.
Yes. Okay. So I love these conversations because, some of the hypnosis that I did before was connecting people with their parallel lives, right? So you sit down and you listen to them and they're like, I just want to maybe they just want to have more compassion. Let's say they're like, I'm really working on that. I just wanted to have more compassion. I want to see people in like a broader view. So, okay. So that's we'll just say that's the issue, right? So then let's go into I say, like, I call it your subconscious, but I believe it's access to the whole spiritual realm. Okay.
Source.
So we're tapping into your soul, and then the soul is like, it's like a projection, right? It's showing you all these infinite possibilities, right? So then we can, as going through there, getting the conscious mind vibration to step aside so we can get to that higher vibrational level, right? When we get in there, tapping into that parallel life, because, before I get into that, quantum physics, right? Every decision and everything that we do splits off.
Right.
We're creating all of these different timelines constantly with every decision that we make, right? So if I decide today I'm going to eat the burger rather than the taco, there's a life out there where I eat the taco rather than the burger, right? Mm-hmm. So now when we get to that, the fun side, the conscious mind is gone. We're in the fun zone, the really quantum zone. Now we can go in because we can pull, if it is our timeline and it's meant for us and we have it, we can pull it to us, right? Because I can't go and pull your timelines. The only timelines that I can pull with you on it is if I'm a part of it.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Pull them to your experience, or what do you mean?
Yeah. Or because now what we're going to do is we're going to pull that energy forward. Because really what we're playing with on that timeline is the energy that's in it, right? Okay. So quantumly, we can tap into any of that energy. So now, when we're visiting like a parallel life, we can tap into that quantum energy. We can pull it closer. So now I'm going to pull it closer. We're going to take a look at like what the compassion side is, right? So yes, your conscious mind may step in a little bit because it needs to understand this for us to when we step into our human being side is the best way I could describe it. So now we're looking, and let's say I see myself where I'm just very loving. Maybe I'm very empathetic. Maybe I have a career in that focuses on that. Maybe, like therapists, a lot of therapists are very empathetic. Yeah. So let's say I'm this really successful therapist. And so I get to see that. Well, I'm not bringing in those actual events. What I'm bringing in is the energy and vibration of those actual events that I then am putting back into my body. So here we go. We're going back to science, right? So I'm going to pull those in, and whatever neuropeptides or peptides that are a vibrational match to that, it's going to lock and key into that receptor. And now you talk about the woman who, maybe she's kung fu fighter. She may not be the best kung fu fighter, but now she has that vibrational match to become that. Does that make sense? Yes. I know it's, for some people it's so out there, but people call the spiritual side, like the woo side, right? And then we have the science side, but the woo and the science actually do go hand in hand. Once you really, I'm going to say really pay attention, that both sides are really talking about the same thing, and it's energy and vibration, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Which I find very similar to the way that people would describe science. And because I come from the Southeast, okay, science in the Bible. Okay. Right. You can find science in the Bible. You can find astrology in the Bible. You can find Chinese medicine in the Bible, right? If you're looking for that kind of thing, you're going to find it there. But it's a good example of looking at two things that sometimes feel like they're very contrasting. And yet they, like you said, they do still have the same energetic. Now, maybe not all parts of them, right?
Yeah.
But yeah.
Well, and that's part of it too, right? So, when you talk about, science and the Bible, there's still different vibrational, everything. Yeah. To me, I'm everything is vibrating. Yeah. Everything's vibrating at different speeds, but with the similarities of it, right? They're going to lock and key.
Yeah. So that's a very elaborate description of essentially saying, whatever your vibration is at the moment, right? Whatever over time, however you want to address time, but whatever your vibration is, you're calling in something that resonates with that. That's why it's really important to watch what your vibration is.
So fun. So, okay. So I don't know about you, but a lot of times I get people and they're like, I'm trying to manifest this. Right? And I actually love working with clients that are like, I really want this into my life. Right. So here, I guess I'm going to give it like another example. So they're like, I've been trying to manifest this and, I've been really thinking all this positive stuff. Well, that's great and all, but let's look at how you're really vibrating. So then when you start to talk to them, they're like, yeah, I put it out there like, I want this magnificent job. And then when you really talk to them, because words and language tell you a lot where we're vibrating, right? They say, well, I just don't really have the education for it. So maybe I shouldn't go for it, but you're putting it out there that you want this job. So guess what you're telling me is that positive thoughts are the only thing that can bring stuff to you. There's a lot of stuff that goes into it. All the universal laws play a part, but now you're showing me where you're really vibrating. So you put out this intent that I really want this great high paying job, but now I don't have the education. Maybe I don't have the experience. So I always tell people, I'm like, well, who cares? Because what we can do is we can go, we're going to open up and expand. That's why expansion is so important, right? Because when we expand, then we pull away those particles and we can work within that space. So let's really expand out our energy. Let's go to that timeline. It could be the parallel timeline where maybe you were this high executive, right? Or maybe it's a timeline that's floating out there that you haven't quite, connected with yet. Because there's infinite amount of possibilities for you, right? So let's go into that quantum field. Let's pull forward that timeline. Let's take a look at it, right? And then, oftentimes you hear, well, I already imagined how I want it. Fantastic. Then you have pulled in that timeline, but let's really see what you pulled in. What parts of that intellectually or consciously did you throw away? And people often look at me and they're like, well, what are you talking about? I said, it doesn't matter how you envisioned it. What matters is that you're not pulling into you because you're talking about, I don't have the experience, I don't have the education, is you're not pulling in the energy from that. Is that making sense?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, so I want to ask one thing. So is it accurate to say that if you have a desire for something somewhere, because what you're talking about is connecting to source and the parts of you, right? Whatever version of you is, of course, also from source. So is it correct to say that if you have a particular desire for something, it's likely that you have already acquired is not the right word, but experienced that vibration in some other realm, and that's why you have a pulling towards it?
I would agree with that. Okay. Yes. Because we're matching, right? We're matching with that vibration. So a lot of times I do talk a lot about the law of detachment when we're talking about wanting to bring, whatever it is to us, because we talk about, everybody's very familiar, right? With the law of attraction, right? And that's why I said all the universal laws play a part in that, because you need to understand how the law of vibration works, right? And so I won't go into all the laws, but one of the most important thing that is often overlooked is that law of detachment. Because even though I pull in that timeline, there's still that, because I am a spiritual being having a human physical experience, hence why we have our conscious side. Am I making sense? So now even though I'm pulling in that timeline, there's probably is truths that are on that timeline that I'm seeing and I want to say on the fun side, but then I'm also creating it as it would relate to where I am to where I think I am. Does that make sense?
Not completely. So you're talking about the spiritual source. We're talking about let's call it higher self, because a lot of people do that.
Okay, perfect.
So
yeah.
Can you restate that?
Okay. One of the things kind of rewinding is, so we pull in the timeline, right? So we want to see what's on the timeline. So the conscious side of us is going to play a role in that, because what the conscious mind is going to do, what it always does, right? It labels things, it put things in box, it organizes things, right? So as we're looking at that timeline and the conscious mind steps in, I'm going to say that's fine. Like, allow it, because maybe what I see myself doing is I see myself sitting down and I'm interviewing, and I give this rock star interview. Then I get the phone call, and instead of what they were going to pay me, they double it. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So it's okay. That's okay. But what happens is that then when we kind of come back to, I'm going to use the word reality, we come back to the reality. What we're actually holding on is, oh, I did a rock star interview. Oh, they doubled my salary. Oh, my boss is really cool. And we're holding on to the expectations that we put on it versus the actual vibration that we felt when I did the rock star interview. How did I feel when I did the rock star interview? What vibrations was I bringing in? Confidence, self-assurance, all those things that go into that. Those are vibrations. So now I want to pull that vibration in. How did I feel when they doubled my salary, right? I felt valued. I felt important. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So bring in those vibrations. But a lot of times what happens is we don't detach from the expectation that we created of how we kind of want it to go versus holding on to the vibrations that need to come into the body again to connect with all those. Yeah. Does that make sense?
It does. And it makes sense in the sense that, I think everybody who kind of works with this stuff there's always about feeling, right? Like it's never about the details. And if you talk to somebody, I mean, even if you think about dreams, or you think about anybody who's under hypnosis or whatever, when they talk, it's not that there are not specifics in it, but they're not quite as important as we think they are. And so one of those things I find, I have a group that we meet and we meditate, we do some other things, but all of us are at different points and that comfort with that experience. And it's really interesting to watch somebody grow spiritually and become more in tune with these ideas and have to learn how to let go of that specificity. Like for me, I can remember even taking Reiki the first time. Okay. So yes, I grew up in the Southeast. There was heavily Christian influence and I didn't really necessarily have a problem with it per se. But I wouldn't say that I completely was like, oh yes, this is the only way, okay. Cause I had different kinds of friends and so forth. But, when we were talking about, they were talking about what people call guides. Okay. And I personally have a really hard time with that because I wasn't raised in a household where there were these heavy images about you have an angel here, there. And can't say that I haven't heard it, but it wasn't pushed down my throat. So you have these angels and you have, this particular one named this thing does, as you could tell, I didn't attach to what the name is or look like or any of that. But that doesn't mean I didn't get the energy of what people were talking about. So to watch people, I remember I took a quick course on calling in your spirit animal and blah, blah, blah. And I think that's great if people love it. But what I found was I felt like the people who were in the course are people who are really drawn to animals and I kind of identify with them. And I'm not saying that I don't identify with an animal, but I don't feel like I need a specific animal that can never change, to guide me. And so I have a hard time with that. So I think on some level, I do have a hard time with the specificity, but that doesn't mean I'm not having the same kind of problems that other people aren't having. But releasing the specificity is extremely important.
Say that last part. I'm sorry.
Releasing the specificity about things is really important.
It is. So I resonate with what you're saying with guides. Like people, when I first started this journey, I'm all guides, but I see the world as energy. So when people would talk about their guides or when they would describe them in detail, I'm like, I feel that energy. Yeah. I'm experiencing that energy, but that's what it is that energy. So people would be like, well, what does your guide look like? Like, what is your guide's name? And I'm like, I don't know. And to me, that's not a big deal. I don't care what they're named, but it's the energy that I'm interacting with.
Oh, that's really
And so,
interesting. That's really interesting because one of the it's like a turning point for me is we started this group and there's two other people who do it with me that started it. And one of them is 70 something years old and the other one is like a little bit younger than me. And I would say they're more experienced at the meditation and so forth than I am. But like we'll do the meditation, and sometimes we will communicate while we're doing it. Like we'll kind of share with each other what we're experiencing. And through the time that we've done that, what would happen was one of them would chime in with whatever she was experiencing, and then the other one would start. And well, I'm not the one who just like I don't have that experience of talking about it quite so much. And I just felt like, well, what? Like okay, yeah, I kind of sense that, right? But then of course you're thinking, well, maybe they're influencing me. But as we continued to do that, what I found was it's irrelevant whether they were influencing me or not, because there were times where we would just not even be sharing. And then finally I would notice something and I think, oh, I'm just noticing something. And then a few seconds later, one of them would start to describe something and I'd realize, oh yeah, that's the same thing. So it's almost like, but it's coming through in a different way. So it didn't have a face, it didn't have a name, it didn't have a physical representation, but it was maybe it was a feeling, or it was, it's hard for people to understand what an energy is, but that's sort of what I expect it to be. It's like it either comes through a feeling, it comes through a thought, it comes through somehow. So you get that information and then
right.
You know what it is. I don't always feel like I know how to act on it, but you do kind of know what it is, but it comes through different people from their life experience in a different way. Like one of these people is really good at seeing visual things. So, I mean, she instantly sees stuff. The other one, she does see visual things, but she does light language. So she has this way of translating essentially what it is what that energy is. And she's so experienced at it. She's in her 70s. She's been seeing energy for a long time and understanding it. But now she's to the point where she's actually like, Spanglish, kind of explaining it to people.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So, it is hard to explain to somebody like like experiencing energy, you know what I mean? Yeah. Or like, truthfully, it is just, it is, to me, it truly is an indescribable experience, because even when we talk about thoughts and feelings, what are thoughts and feelings is energy, right? So a lot of times when I work with people, like when I'm working with people and, they're really attached to the thoughts that come into their head, I usually kind of I do kind of like a semi-trance like exercise or experience with them, for them to see that every single thought that comes in, you can choose whether or not to allow that energy to enter into your body. So if the thought is, like negative, or it could even be self-harming, right? You choose whether to want to hold on to that. But then when I do this other exercise, or I hate using the word exercise, but this experience, because that's what they're doing, we can transmute that's coming in. And even if, let's say, that self-harming thought tries to come in, you can still look at it and be like, and allow your vibration to stay high enough where you can recognize that it's a lower vibration, or like it's not a good thought, right? But it doesn't mean that you have to hold on to that.
Yeah.
Does that make
complete sense? Because that was one of the turning points with my grief and I was listening to all kinds of stuff, and Deepak Chopra was the one who articulated it in the way that stuck for me. And of course I was having like anxiety and, like that after after he died. And it's like you get into it is like that stuck energy. It's like you get into this kind of snowball effect, and then you don't know what to do to get out, but eventually you can. So like if you go to sleep, you can get out of it, or you like you're talking about, break it and allow the conscious mind to just take a back seat. Yeah. What I noticed when I finally got that was like, I was fine in whatever situation, and then something would come up and it would trigger me. And then I realized, and then it would just go. And then I'd be like, wait a minute, no, I don't actually, that's because he said thoughts, exactly what you're describing. Thoughts are things that we tend to think are truth, but they're just thoughts. They're just waves that come in, and they can leave just the same.
And they can easily float out. Yeah. So I'm so glad that you said that. Okay. So So what you're describing is what we were talking about in the beginning, those memory chains. And those memory chains are what puts us into those patterns. I call them subroutines because we can be on our path and be in alignment, and we know that we are. And then we have these subroutines that are the patterns that we just kind of keep replaying, right? I keep going for like the abusive man, or I keep sabotaging myself when I have the opportunity to have these really good jobs. So we have these subroutines that are playing, which are all connected to those memory chains. So we're playing all of those patterns. But when I work with somebody who's really stuck in that because it's their thoughts that they're really holding on to, and I can show them that you can have that thought come in, but you can always transmute it, right? So I always do this one thing where I have them do we go kind of into the subconscious, and so we're bringing up whatever it is that they're needing to experience. It's even to experience something positive, right? Mm-hmm. And the first time they do it, they're still stuck in what that issue is that they came in, right? So they're still holding on to that thought. So then we amp it up a little bit. They kind of have this good thought. And then I completely take them out of that and put them right into their conscious mind. So then I give them, I don't math very well. So I give them some difficult math problem, and they sit there and they're like, because it's sometimes it can be a really hard transition going from subconscious to conscious mind. And they're sitting there and you see them, they're counting on their fingers. And of course, I don't make them do it. I start laughing and I said, how quickly and easily was it for you to move from that positive thought to this thought of, oh my gosh, I have to figure out this math problem. Like, I got to be this math whiz. And they stop, and it was like that, right? And they're like, yes. And I said, so, research shows that we have over 60,000 thoughts flooding us every day. And we very much are telepathic beings. We don't realize it that we are, but we walk into Walmart and all of a sudden, we go from being happy to being really angry and very frustrated with everyone, right?
Or turn the news on.
Yeah, exactly. And now we're thinking how irritated I am with that person, or, why am I standing in this line so long? So anyway, so we have over 60,000 thoughts that come into our energy field, into our mind. And we can choose which thoughts are for us or which thoughts aren't for us. So I was telling them, I'm like, if the thought comes in, swish it away. And all you have to say to it is, if this is really something that is meant for me, you will come back later. But I'm going to add an extra part of energy on it. I want you to come back later with some sort of solution or some sort of greater awareness for me.
Okay.
And if it comes back, then you know that it's yours. You know what I mean? So,
I see.
Sometimes, you know what I mean? So sometimes I have people that are like, well, I'm just sad. I'm sad all the time. I think about how I'm sad all the time. I'm like, well, give it a shot. Swish it away. And then go on with your day, right? And then if it comes back and you start feeling sad, all you got to do is talk to it. We can talk to energy, right? Because again, our words carry energy. So even when we say them, it's a vibration that's connecting to this. Why am I sad? Well, the original thought that may have come in was that you're sad, that, well, for me, okay, so I'll use a personal example. I was so sad when I sent my son off to college. Oh my God, I'm going to miss him. He's gone, my buddy. What am I going to do? Right. So I do sit in that sadness. And then I'm like, nope. I'm going to send that vibration away because I can choose whether or not to have it. And then let's say 2 hours later, I'm sad again. But because I created a memory that's connected to the original sadness, I'm like, oh my God, it's him. Oh, I'm so sad. Right. But if I communicate with it, it's all about communicating, right? If I communicate with it and I'm like, well, why am I sad this time? Well, maybe I'm sad because maybe I went to Walmart and I picked up on somebody else's thought. Is this thought mine? Nope. Get rid of it. Do you know what I mean? So we have to be,
and puts it into the conscious.
Yes. Yes. And what happens is once you train your higher self, not train, but once you get those subroutines out of those patterns and you're back into your higher self wants to work for you, not against you. So it's going to transfer. It'll be like, oh, you're kind of falling into this pattern. We're going to transmute it, and it's going to send it to your conscious mind for you to start getting out of it quickly.
So you're saying that it sends you essentially, I mean, maybe not triggers, but it's sending you things that are causing you to notice that, and then deal with it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, because that's what we're asking, right? So literally when we're saying thought, I want you to go away, we're having a conversation with that energy, but we're also having a conversation with our higher self saying, higher self, if this is something that I need to address, then I know that you're going to bring it back to me because there's something that is important to it. But here's where the importance is. We don't dwell on the sadness. We're asking it information. What is it that I need to know in my awareness? So maybe the sadness is that I can't even think of anything off the top of my head, but maybe like the sadness is, you know what, you really just need to, maybe you just need to heal some. I mean, it could be, I'm just kind of throwing this out there. Maybe you need to heal, something that your boss said to you last week. Do you know what I mean? Because you chose to ignore it and now it's still sitting on the surface. I'm just kind of throwing that out there. But or what is the lesson that I need to learn? Well, maybe the lesson is that I need to learn is that there's really not sadness. I created the sadness in the situation and it's not really sadness, but all I need to do is just acknowledge the fact that I just miss him. Mm-hmm. I hope that's making sense, because when we start getting into that, it can get really complicated. But that's one of the reasons why I love working with like the higher self or like the subconscious mind, because you can go in, because we do create those programs or those subroutines that we don't want, but we can go in there and we really can reprogram them. Mm-hmm. So, because that's what it's doing, it's running on automatic pilot. And then when something comes in, when the sadness comes in, I go, oh, well, it's okay. I'm just missing him. And I don't have to be sad. I can just acknowledge that I'm missing him and maybe get excited because maybe I'm going to see him in like a week. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, so it's like a dance between the conscious and the unconscious or higher self or whatever you want to call it. Because initially when you first started talking, I was thinking, okay, so that means that the older we get, the worse it's going to be. Right? Like if you think about it, that's what happens when we think that's aging, right? Like we get older. And so we have more dis-ease, which is connected to these patterns. Right. But if we get to, I kind of wonder if that's where, definitely like the spiritual gurus are the ones that live for so much longer than we ever imagined.
I was just thinking that live to be like 150.
Yeah. So they've learned to essentially do what you're talking about. And so therefore the neuropeptides are not activated and they're not stuck wherever they are.
Yeah.
And so the energy flows and things function better longer. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, this is really awesome. Thank you so much for joining us. I think we can.
So much fun stuff. Yeah. Thank you for letting me share that. I get so excited to talk about this stuff because I just think it's so fascinating. And truth, if anybody takes anything away from that, you are the one that's in control of you. Nothing else out there can control you. You get to be, the captain of your own ship. So choose how you want it to be.
And I will add to that. When you refer to you, we are referring to the higher version of you that also works with the conscious and the physical version of you. So it's not like only your physical and only your regular, awake state is working with this. You can trust in the part of you that loves you more than anything could possibly love you. That's what I love about hypnosis, because it's like, I don't have to argue about what they say because they say it for themselves. They're getting the answer.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And you're like, I want you to go back and listen to this and hear how you talked about yourself. This is the true version of you, not this version that, going through life has picked up, unrealistic expectations, societal programming, limiting beliefs. This is you. Yeah. And you said it, not me. Yeah. Yes.
Send inquiries, suggestions for new discussion topics, and comments to podcast@happylioncenter.com. That's podcast@happylioncenter.com. If you found this content enjoyable or helpful, please comment, share, and download. Donations are appreciated and help us to produce more of similar content. Consider making a contribution at the links in the description box. Your support is greatly appreciated. The views and opinions expressed on this podcast are those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of the Happy Lion Center and are not intended to malign any religion, ethnic group, club, organization, company, individual, or anyone or anything. None of the content provided should be considered a substitute for legal, financial, medical, psychiatric advice, or as care from a certified professional.